Paul writes to Timothy and he tells him that all Scripture is God-breathed. All Scripture is inspired. Now, up until this time when Paul uses this word, we don't have record of the word being used anywhere else. This word is a compound Greek word which takes God, theo, and then it takes pneustos, and it is God-breathed. Some believe that Paul actually made the word up to indicate that all Scripture was God-breathed. When we talk about inspiration, specifically the inspiration of Scripture, some people misunderstand that. Some people think that inspired refers to people like Mozart, people who, like Handel, who wrote great pieces of work, and they say they were inspired when they wrote this piece. But that's not what we're talking about when we talk about Scripture. When we talk about Scripture, the image I want you to have in your mind is of a master trumpeter. And this master trumpeter is using men. He's using Paul, he's using John, he's using Peter, and he's using those instruments to produce a Bible that is God-breathed. Perhaps like a master trumpeter might play a trumpet. Or he might play a piccolo. Or he might even play a shofar. And all of these instruments would make a different sound, but the sound is just as reliable as the trumpeter who's playing those instruments. We can rely on Scripture because it has God for its author. Because God cannot tell a lie, we trust that Scripture does not lie. It's based on the person who's blowing through the instruments, not on the instruments themselves. So I don't have to trust that John, Peter, or Paul were perfect. All I have to trust is that behind those instruments was a God who cannot lie, a God who is infallible, a God who is perfect, a God who breathed through them so that we can describe the very words of Scripture as God-breathed. And that's why we can trust that Scripture is infallible, that Scripture is inerrant, and that Scripture is inspired by God.